Helldivers 2 just released a new patch. This one is a big one. There were quite a lot of balance changes to weapons and a lot of people's fan favorite, the Railgun, that I actually just of course put a video out about. So I wanted to cover these and give an honest take on them so far. I won't be going over each change individually, so if you would like to look at those and see what they did, you're more than welcome to pause the video here to have a look, but otherwise, let's go ahead and get right into testing these and see how this affected the game overall. First up, the primary that everyone raves about is the Breaker Shotgun. This did receive two changes. First, they reduced the mag size from 16 down to 13, and they added 25 more recoil on the stat sheet. After trying this out, you really don't notice any difference in the recoil here, but the 3 in the mag you will notice as you play. I don't think this is going to change many people's opinion on the weapon, but you will see a difference when you're using this with how many shots you can put out. But as far as damage, this weapon is mostly unaffected. The Punisher got a buff as well. This is one of the first weapons that you actually can obtain early on, and it seems like they adjusted this to be on par with the Slugger Shotgun, but with more ammo going from 40 to 60 total, as well as the damage going from 40 to 45 per bullet. I think this is still slightly weaker in the armor penetration than the Slugger, but it feels much better than it did before, and the increased stagger force feels incredible. I think this weapon is going to be bumped up in many people's arsenal as one of the weapons they use more often. It's still not as great at crowd control, but it does make me want to actually use it more often now, so I think that is amazing. Next, the shield, which takes 12 seconds now to fully recharge from the moment it's broken to the moment it's usable again. Now, this really is not a big issue and will still be very usable to many players. While this was a bit of a nerf, I don't think it's going to make a huge wave overall when it comes to what players pick, as it still prevents most of the important hits when it's active, so I still think it's very easy to use. The Flamethrower received a massive 50% damage per second buff. One thing that has always been a bit of an issue for me with this weapon was when you first attempt to fire it, it has to ignite and takes a couple of seconds to actually get going, which by that point it's possible to get overrun, especially by smaller targets like hunters. While this did get a decent damage increase, I still think one of the biggest issues is that you can light yourself on fire very easily if something jumps into you, mainly on the bug side, as bots won't really attempt that. So it can do a decent with crowd control, and on controlled bursts it makes it much easier to mitigate that fire risk, but it does more damage overall and can take out a charger pretty quickly, which I think makes it a better pick than it used to be, but it still has quite a high risk factor, so use it at your own risk. They added new environmental challenges to the maps, and this one was a meteor storm that comes down and just absolutely rains destruction on the map. I think this is incredible, as it can be a boon and it can also be a hindrance. This can take you out along with your enemies and even do objectives for you if you get lucky. I really like how this looks, and I'm excited to see some of the other ones that they add. Next up, the 380mm and the 120mm barrage. They seem to just make this last longer and have a smaller radius that I imagine was supposed to make this more accurate and usable in more situations, but it still seems quite random as far as the placement, and there are many other stratagems that do what this is supposed to do and much faster, as well as having a much shorter cooldown than these two, and so I don't really think that this update made it really much better overall as a stratagem. Although I think it's an improvement and a step in the right direction for this overall, I still think there are better picks than this, and I wouldn't really recommend using this personally, but of course that's just my opinion. The Breaker Spray and Pray got a buff, now sporting an actually higher fire rate than the regular Breaker, with less total ammo in the mag, but more damage overall. It also does sport better armor penetration as well, so I think they made this weapon more usable for sure. I don't think it's going to really make it into anybody's top 3 picks still, but it does feel much better and can compete in the arsenal more now than it could before, so I think it's an overall improvement, and it definitely feels better than it did before. Now, the hot topic that everyone is most likely wanting to hear about, the Railgun. They did overall nerf this weapon, but I do think that this was a good change. Hear me out. The gun wasn't working as intended by the devs before. I imagine, as most tasks didn't matter whether you did them in unsafe mode or safe mode, so now that this gun is actually working like it should, where safe mode is actually not as powerful, it makes more sense as a weapon, and more skill-based as you have to use the unsafe mode and charge it properly, using its risk factor to get more damage, which I think is amazing. Now, I haven't tested this in a multiplayer setting yet, but it feels the same on Bile Titans mostly. For me, in solo, where it's going to take a few shots to actually take them down. Now, again, in multiplayer, this may change. The one massive change that I did notice is that even in unsafe mode, the charger's legs are going to take quite a bit more time to come off now. So it's not a couple of quick shots and they go down. So for this, you're really going to need to plan how to deal with your enemy more now than ever. This is going to encourage more team play and building around strengths and weaknesses of certain things that you bring into the fight. The safe mode still has some armor penetration, but it's going to take more shots on the smaller enemies like the Bile Spewer, which has an armored head, and takes a couple of shots now, as well as the Scout Strider, which is the walker type enemy on the bot side. So these are going to be a bit harder to deal with just using the Railgun. While I think that the railgun change was a good thing, as it should now work as intended, I do feel like the other buffs to the support weapons weren't major, so you are still going to need to accommodate downtimes or large crowds with stratagems and teammates, which was a big thing in the first game as well, so overall I think this was not a bad change. Next is the laser cannon. So far, it feels a bit faster to use and you can get around easier when using it, but overall the armor penetration didn't seem to be much improved. The notes stated that it has increased damage against durable enemy parts and increased armor penetration. I was shooting at a charger and a bile titan for quite some time, and it seems like if this is doing damage, it's going to take a really long time to take them down, even when hitting the bile titan in the mouth while it's open. So while the weapon does feel better, it still doesn't seem like a top pick in my opinion, and I did also try this on a cold planet, so it could fire longer, and that still didn't really convince me that this was a decent pick even with the modifier helping it out. So as far as this weapon, I still don't think it's a great support weapon. Again, as far as the changes go, I think it's a great step in the right direction as far as improving them and making them a little bit easier and more, functional as a weapon. But overall, I still don't think it's going to be a top pick here, and I still think there's going to be better choices. They fixed armor. This was a long-awaited change for many people as they wanted to feel like they were more durable when wearing heavier sets, which makes sense. It seems like they did make small tweaks here, and you can take a bit more damage when wearing the heavier sets, but not by much. At most a couple of hits it seems, at least in my experience. I still think that the light armor is the way to go, as you're able to evade and get places faster than with the heavy choice, so I don't think this is going to change what armor people wear, but I did make sure as well that I didn't have any extra health buffs on the armor or the vitality booster, so this was just the base armor values. It could work well with those buffs, so of course, make a choice as far as what you use with those in mind. I wanted to test to see if the heavy armor actually prevented you from getting one-shotted by rocket devastators as well, and it seemed like that was still unchanged. So I think the light armor is better even through the buff in my opinion. Of course, make what choice you feel is right, as there definitely seems to be a difference now, but for my personal playstyle, the light armor still feels like the right fit. This wasn't every single change that they made, but I wanted to cover the bigger ones that I felt were most important. I think that again, the railgun getting changed to the way it feels like it should have been is a great thing. The lower damage even in unsafe mode isn't my favorite overall, as I think the risk of it blowing up should be met with some decent power, but I do feel that the change making the safe and unsafe modes different was absolutely needed. Let me know what you guys think of the changes so far that were made to the game, and if there was anything that I missed, I would love to know. This is all in my limited experience, as the update did just come out, so some things may come to light and people may have more info, but this was my initial thoughts on the changes so far. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you in the next one.